Hello everyone, we're back with Mariusz. Mariusz, please let me
Hello.
know if you hear me, if you see me, if everything is okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me well
Good.
as well?
Yes, absolutely. Just 1 second, I'll double check if everything is good with our translation. Just a second. Yes, seems like everything is fine. So I would like to remind our viewers. So guys, you joined Games Gathering Conference 2023. We got our marketing track live run by Google Camp. And right now we got our next speaker, Mariusz, Mariusz Gasiewski. He's a mobile gaming and app lead at Google in Central and Eastern Europe region. I hope I said everything correct, right?
Yes, yes, sure.
Cool. So it seems like we're going to talk about mobile games, the future of mobile games. Absolutely very interesting topic. It's like in our like unfortunately sometimes very unstable world. It's very interesting. Is it still like very effective to develop mobile games and what like we expect from it? So, Marius, I think I'm done with talking. Now it's your time. Have fun.
Hello everyone. Also, let me kind of share my presentation. Can you see my screen and my presentation?
Yes, everything is absolutely fine. We see everyone sees.
Yeah. Hello. So today I'll be talking about mobile gaming market. What we see based on data, based what we see based on the last months, which countries are growing, and agenda for today would be around what is the situation today, uh, what categories countries are gaining, which markets and countries make sense to focus on, how easy it is to enter the market, how hard is mobile versus other types of gaming as well. So today we will have a lot of data, but I think it's like in this topic it makes sense to really talk like really looking at the data, because of course we can do different hypotheses, think about the different trends, but again data it's I think the most useful to be very precise and making sure that we know what we are talking about. So even now, the mobile gaming has a few different phases. So the first one, if we look at the data for 2022, it's really serious business, like more than 90 billion US dollars. So we see that's actually it's kind of half of the whole gaming market. So if we compare it with in general with different types of industries, it's actually mobile gaming is already bigger than almost cinema, sports life, and music life industry combined. So it's really big industry. So it's growing very heavily. But of course, on the other side, we see that the last months were not easy in that industry. We saw a lot of growth in 2021, 2022, and in the last quarters that market got quite strong hit. And actually, we see it even in terms of topics like how much investment is going to the gaming market overall. Yeah, so it's easy even to look at the data when we compare quarter starting from Q3 2022 up to Q2 this year versus what happened, for example, in 2021, 2022. So like again, it's big market. It had extensive growth, but again, the last months had quite a lot of challenges. So that actually brings us to the first question: what is the situation in industry now? So if we look at the data, that's actually showing the gaming market, Google Play and iOS combined. I excluded China from the data because, of course, for majority of the developers, mobile developers, China is not really accessible because it requires separate licenses, and it's totally different. So If we look in general in the gaming combining Android and iOS, excluding China, that's the year-over-year data. So, for example, like April or like June 2023 versus June 2022, and we see that 2022 that market got strong hit, but last months, starting from beginning of the year, they were actually much better than the previous months. Yeah, so the big base for the mobile gaming that was created in 2021 and created quite challenging situation for 2022, because the 2022 was compared with 2021. We see it's over, and they actually the last months are getting much better, and we should actually expect better situation in the next months, which I think is really positive information. And in general, a lot of that discussion around mobile gaming, like I heard some comments like the mobile gaming is over, or there is no growth anymore. Even if we look at mobile gaming from a little bit longer perspective, and we divide that period into three periods, like the first one that was happening before the COVID, which is like we see the yellow line, and then we see much bigger growth coming during the COVID, which is the green line, and then we add this part after the COVID, which is the red line. Actually, what is quite interesting, the average year over year over the whole period would be kind of similar. Yeah, so if we combine uh, uh, the red and the green, and we will do average, it's not much different. It's still a bit lower, but not much different than the yellow line before that COVID. Yes, so again, that COVID added a lot of growth. So then the next months we had a little bit lower growth, but still, again, in the next months we should expect much better situation in the mobile gaming overall. If we go deeper into those topics and we look at what's happening in the Google Play, we see that on the Google Play, especially on the revenue side, the 2022, especially in the middle of the year, was quite hard. Like most of the months had minus 15, minus 12% year over year. So comparing 2022 versus 2021, but again, the last months are getting better. Just last month, which is June 2022, 2023 versus to the June 2022, it's a little bit more challenging, but we'll get to that. Could do that, but still we see much more positive information versus the past. It's actually getting even more interesting if we go deeper and we look at what's happening in iOS. Again, excluding China, we see that in this case, on one side, that dip in the middle of the year 2022 was deeper than on Android, because in some months we had even almost minus 20% year over year. Because to the COVID, we had additional challenges on the iOS happening around the privacy topics. But on the other side, because of that, beginning of the year is actually really strong versus the previous months. And actually, it's even more positive than on Android side. Actually, last month we have plus 4, plus 6% year over year, with a little bit acceleration of the growth as well. Of course, with that comes the question in general, how important is still that US in the whole mobile gaming market? Because for many people, still mobile gaming is mostly about US. So if we look at the data, we see that US is still a very important part of the revenue, both on Android and iOS. So, for example, if we look at the first 6 months of this year, so like H1 2023, we see that US was around 29% of revenue. We are talking here about in-app purchases plus subscriptions in case of Google Play, and it was around almost 30% of the revenue in iOS. We see that, of course, share of the revenue both on iOS and Android is quite similar, with the difference that, of course, in case of Google Play, that revenue is responsible for pretty small percentage of the downloads, because US is less than 5% of the downloads on Android overall, versus in case of iOS, US is almost 25% of downloads worldwide. Yeah, so in this case, we can say that US is still important, but in case of iOS, this US is even more important than in case of Android. Of course, if we look at what's happening in especially in US, because again, we see that the situation in US on the Google Play is improving, but still, if we compare it with overall, the US on the Google Play is actually has hard time versus overall. So actually, in general, US on Android is actually growing lower than average, which means that again, that non-US markets are getting more and more important on Google Play. And we saw actually that if we even saw that, for example, in this Google Play, we had this quite deep change of the revenue in June 2023 versus June 2022 on the Google Play. Actually, really important part was actually taken in case of United States. Yeah, because again, especially June 2023 was quite hard on the Google Play in US. Again, June 2023 versus June 2022 was very hard on US, and it's not the case for iOS. Again, iOS US is actually growing really nicely on iOS, which means that again, in general, US is more important on iOS than on Android. But in the next months, we can even expect that importance of US on iOS will be growing much more than versus on the Google Play. What is quite interesting as well, we see that on iOS in US, the revenue is growing actually quite much faster than downloads. If we look at the year-over-year data, which means we can actually expect growing competition in terms of user acquisition of the users on that market. Yeah, because of course, if we have more revenue divided by the by lower number of users, then the LTV is growing per user, which means that we have, of course, higher competition across every user. Okay. If we look, if we again combine together Google Play and iOS for US, we still see quite positive situation. But again, that situation on iOS is better than on Android, and still US is in general below the average of the world, which means that still non-US markets will be gaining more and more in the whole revenue, even if we're not adding ad revenue here, because if we add ad revenue, of course, then importance of non-US markets will be even higher. Because of course we see that in general, the importance of hybrid monetization, ad monetization, is much higher in non-US markets than in the US it itself. Okay, so how actually at the same time, how the gaming categories are kind of shifting. So we see in this case, if we look at the data, we see that in the last months, again, comparing H1 2023 versus H1 2022, which means like H1, which is like the 6 months of this year versus the 6 months of the previous year, we see that if we look at the top gaming categories, and in this case, we have the data for Google Play and Android. And of course, the data is ranked by the total revenue, which means we see that the biggest categories are role playing, strategy, and casual genres. We see that actually in the last months, the quite challenging situations actually in those core gaming genres like role playing and strategy, and it's continuity of the process happening in the even previous months. Yeah, so again, if we look at the previous years, even that situation in that genre is getting more challenging. Again, still they are the biggest genres, but for example, like casual genres are growing much faster, but still, of course, with a little bit lower growth than in the past. We saw quite extensive growth in genres like casino or like card games, but most of that genre was actually coming from non-US markets. Most of that was coming from emerging markets. And what is quite interesting as well, we see quite interesting growth in those smaller genres that were very ad monetized, and we see more and more mm, subscriptions and in-app revenue in those genres, for example, like trivia or educational games. If we look even at top growing games on the Google Play, again, the January to June 2023 versus the January to June 2022, we saw that there are still some games that could create extremely strong position in very short time. So, for example, if you see that no place in this revenue change, it means that that game almost did not exist in the previous months. So in this case, we still see some games that got very strong growth. A lot of those games are actually coming from Asia. A lot of them are coming from role playing strategy, but we see actually quite a lot of coming from more casual genres like casual, bold, for example, really big success of Monopoly Go, for example, or we see actually more and more games done with specific IP. So, for example, FIFA games. So again, more and more developers are trying to use different ways to differentiate themselves from the competition, and even IP is one of those ways. If we look at the top declining games at the same time, we actually see that most really majority of those top declining games are actually like core games, like role playing, strategy, uh, action games. Those games that very often grew quite extensively in 2021, 2022. Sometimes using the cheap cost of capital that at the time existed to grow extensively, growth and user acquisition. But of course, in reality of the growing cost of the capital, those tactics are less and less effective. So at that time, we can look at what is happening in terms of monetization. So in this case, I thought, okay, let's look at what's happening in terms of the monetization. Yeah. So in this case, we see the data for revenue per downloads. Again, comparing H1 2023 versus the previous year. I did it just for US to make sure that we have kind of ceteris paribus situation, and of course, looking at the revenue per download is a little bit kind of challenging topic, because it's very hard to look at just the revenue of the new downloads. We look at in general, we look at a lot of revenue that is generated by existing users, but in general we saw growing monetization for casino, strategy, role playing. Sorry, we have very high monetization for those genres, but actually even in those genres this revenue per download declined a little bit. We see growing revenue per download, for example, in casual genre. So again, we see and more casual games with extremely good monetization. The same is happening, for example, in some word games or even some very specific games like music games. If we look at what's happening in terms of categories on iOS side, so this is actually the looking at the data for iOS again, excluding China, because again China is not accessible for most of the developers. We see really good situation of casual genre again. We see the same trend as in Android. So still, last months and even years was very strong growth of casual games, and still casual games are growing. Even in growing iOS overall, we had some challenges in genres like strategy, like action games or role playing games. We had much better situation, for example, in genres like board games or even like puzzle games. Yeah, again, those like combination of puzzle casual is actually something working pretty well on iOS in the last months, and I think that will be the trend for the next months as well. If we look at the top successes on iOS, most of them were actually Asian games. A lot of coming exactly from like strategy, role playing. We have a lot of Chinese players that on one side they are growing their position in China, but then on the other side they are using that position to actually enter much deeply the global market. And in general, what we can see, I will talk about it a little bit later, we can see that in general the data, the revenue concentration on top games is much higher on iOS than Android. If we look at the top declining games, again, kind of very similar situation as in case of Android. So we have the games like Diablo or Dragon Ball or Survivor or like State of Survival that were extremely popular in 2022, and they are still popular, but again they have the kind of challenge to continue that success from the previous months. If we look at the monetization, again, in general, revenue per download is growing. If we look at this, like for many genres, again, we saw that especially grew quite extensively from casual genre. You could see that almost 50% year over year revenue per download growth in US on iOS for casual genre. It was declining for genres like adventure, like role playing. So again, like casual education games have in pretty good position, almost 20% year over year. Puzzle games, they are really in good position. So actually, we see that in general on both platforms still, puzzle games, casual games are doing really good. I mean, of course, with growing competition, but it's still, because of the very broad audience, it has still quite good market. Okay. With that, of course, we can ask ourselves what is happening at the market level. Is that if we look at the market level, of course, like topics related to Android versus iOS play quite important role. So, for example, we see that on average, if we look at the popularity of mobile operating systems, Android is responsible for around like more than 70% of devices, but iOS is around almost 30%. And in general, in the last months, they grew a little bit their market position. So that's why actually part of that good situation on iOS is partially coming from the fact that in general iOS had pretty good shipment of devices and in the last quarters. If we look at like at the deeper level, we can see looking at the data that in general the market, the Western markets do not have a lot of spaces for additional smartphone penetration. Yes, so that's why actually still we see that US, Germany, UK. They are still the most important in the gaming market, but there will be not much growth in that market because even if we look at the smartphone and device penetration, it's much harder and harder actually to add additional devices in those markets. Yeah, so that's why actually a lot of that growth will be coming from markets like Vietnam, Brazil, Philippines, India, because again, even from device perspective, we can expect growth of devices in those markets. And it's actually quite easy even to look at, for example, at US as the good as the example that in this case, if we look at the growth rate for smartphone users year over year, so like up to 2016 we had like double digit growth, but actually starting from 2021 we see almost no growth in terms of smartphone users. Yes, more just the place replacement of the previous devices. So that's why that market will be still extremely important, but most of that growth will be coming from other markets, which of course brings us to the question, okay, but what markets? So if we start to look at the data, and this is the very recent data from the first 6 months of the year, so very recent data, we see that in general, of course, by revenue share on Android, US is kind of important, the most important for the in terms of the gaming revenue, like it's almost 29% of the revenue, followed by the Asian markets like South Korea and Japan, then Germany and UK. But of course, overall, those markets are responsible for very small percentage of the downloads. Yeah, so if we even look at the top first 5 market, it's actually it's like 8% of the all downloads. Yeah, so that's why of course even in that case those markets are most important in terms of revenue now. But of course we can expect that competition there is the highest and it will be growing as well. Again, we will see heavily growing competition in those tier top 1 markets because again there is not much possibility to add new users. It will be just fight for existing users, which is different situation. For example, if we look at the India, yeah, which is almost 20% of the downloads and just less than 1% of the in-app and subscription revenue. But it's a little bit different situation if we add the ad revenue, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's the market now. But what's happening if we look at the year-over-year data? So in general, year-over-year, you see that US is below the benchmark for overall because the worldwide is like more or less the plateau market for the 6 months with growing numbers for the recent months. But we see that actually most of those tier 1 markets are below the average. We see quite high growth coming from tier 2 and tier 3 markets, even in terms of revenue. Even if we look at Poland, for example, it has 20% year-over-year revenue growth in mobile gaming. But if we look at markets like Turkey, like Indonesia, Netherlands, they're actually those smaller markets together bring quite strong growth overall. Uh, we see, much more challenging situation in markets like UK, like Japan. If we look at the same data but from the download perspective, so in this case, we had the revenue sorted by the size of the revenue. So of course, like US was number one, South Korea number two in terms of revenue. But if we look by the downloads, that's a little bit different situation. So we see that, for example, like extremely strong position of India, Brazil, Indonesia, which means that especially if we have like ad monetized or hybrid monetized games, those markets should be more and more important for us, because again, they are still not a huge part of the revenue, but their position overall is actually growing. Even markets like Nigeria or Nigeria or Egypt, they're actually getting more and more important in terms of smaller games as well. I mean, smaller games, which means like once you have the game where you have quite limited budget and you have very limited options. Not necessarily you should really focus on US. You should be more picky in choosing those markets that have higher potential to grow in the next months. If we look at in general at the emerging markets, I think there is more and more happening there as well. Even coming from even from, for example, like demographics perspective. Yes, so for example, if we look at and comparing like Africa now versus what will happen to Africa in like 70 years, it's hard to believe what will be happening there. Yes, so for example, like countries like Nigeria will have almost 1 billion users. Countries that have very low importance, Tanzania, they will have almost like 300 million users. Yes, so again, those markets will be gaining more and more in terms of even the population, especially that if we look at the data by the demographics, not just by the size, but from the demographics perspective, you see how actually like Africa and Latin America will be gaining in the long term, even because huge amount of the population they have is just young population that will be getting more and more heavily into digital space. So it will be more and more active in mobile gaming as well. Versus if we look at Europe or North America, they are of course very developed societies, but even by the perspective that a lot of those users are very old, and in many of those countries we have even declining birth rate. Importance of those countries will be declining. And of course, that means that if we look at acquisition of the users from a few different perspectives, especially for those that have limited resources. For example, if you are looking for the markets that you want to use it to test some game, do not only think only about US, but remember that some things can be like tested, checked much cheaper in those emerging markets. Yes, so for example, again, if I look at the internal data of Google, for one user in US, you can buy almost 40 users in Turkey. Yes, so again, of course, the data from US and tier one markets, especially for monetization soft launches, will be much more valid than, for example, from countries like Turkey or like Vietnam. But for other purposes, it can work really well. If we look at iOS in terms of top markets, of course, US is the most important, but followed by actually China, where actually the China has even higher monetization in iOS than US. You see that actually China is almost half of the users in terms versus US on iOS, but it's almost the same revenue share. But still, in terms of revenue, The markets that are quite important are Asian markets like Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and then some tier one markets like UK, Canada, Australia. But even some emerging markets like Vietnam are actually getting quite important in terms of iOS. And if we look at the growth rate, of course, in case of iOS, that growth rate like kind of exists. Overall, we see that pretty good situation is in markets like Taiwan, South Korea. The markets that were kind of more challenging are like US or, for example, China. But as we saw from the previous data, with really improving the data kind of for countries like US. But still, we see quite a lot of growth on iOS in those tier 2 and tier 3 markets as well, like Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Singapore. Again, if you have small possibilities to grow your game and small resources, look at those markets as well, not just on US. And of course, with that, it comes the next question: how it easy is actually to enter the specific market. Yeah, and what we see, and it's quite important to know, is that in general, mobile gaming is quite concentrated market. Yeah, with higher concentration on iOS than Android. So, for example, this is data showing what percentage of the revenue is taken by the top 10 games, then those games that are between like 11 to 50 and like top 100 games and so on. We see extremely strong concentration on iOS side. Top 10 games on iOS are taking almost 20% of the revenue, but even on Android it's 15%, which means that around top 100 games are actually almost taking half of the revenue. Yeah, so that's why again, Android market is big, is growing really well, but we need to face quite strong concentration of the market situation as well. That concentration is actually quite high even in genres like casual genres. For example, like based on the app Magic, we see that just less than half of the percent of the casual games released in the past games, they earn more than $100,000 monthly. Yeah, so again, it's growing market, but has some challenges as well. If we look at this market entrance, we see that market concentration is much higher on the revenue than on download side. So, for example, like top 10 games, they take much higher share of the revenue, that share of the downloads, both in terms of iOS and Android, with better situation on Android. So that's why actually in general, if we look at the revenue versus downloads, which means for me more kind of two markets, like the games, the games that are focused more on the in-app purchases, and the games that are more focused on downloads and or ads. In general, from the market entrance, the market focused on in-apps, it's really big, and it's actually kind of bigger. But on the other side, it's a little bit easier sometimes to enter that market for ad monetized games, because again, this market concentration for the top games is actually lower on the downloads than on the revenue side. With that actually comes the question, okay, how easy it's actually to enter that market? And I think there are some specific quality bars that are quite important to know. So, for example, we see that, for example, a lot of those top games. So in this is we have the segments of those games divided by top 10 games, top 50 games, top 100 games. A lot of those games were created kind of many years ago. So that's why if we enter the market, we need to face the competition not just from the existing games, but from that existing games, especially in this in-app market. Yeah, so that's why when I'm saying that in general this IIP driven market is more competitive, because again we see much higher revenue concentration, and then in general we see that like importance of top games is higher there, and we see, I would say, kind of more voice taken by those biggest games that were just done a few years ago, and they are developed so well that they create extremely high quality bar for the new entrants. And of course, it's not only just about when it was created, but in terms of the quality. Yes, so for example, if we look at the ratings for top games in US, to just look at the data, we see that, for example, in general, those games, it's not that they were just done some time ago, but they're extremely high quality. Yeah? So that's why, of course, like, if I'm creating the good game and I want to really be important at market, like, I should really aim at rating like 4.4, 4.3 and higher. Yeah, because again, that is more or less the threshold quality for top games now. And of course, with that comes the question around monetization and growth. So in this case, we see that that's quite interesting report coming from Unity when we look at the data comparing the ad and IP monetization. Like overall, we see that in almost all genres, we see growth of the hybrid monetization. So we see more and more games that, even if they are IIP driven, so like in-app purchase driven, they are adding some portion coming from ads. And then on the other side, if we have ad revenue based games, then even on those games, developers are trying to add at least some part of the revenue from in-app purchases. Yeah, so that's why even if we look at the combined hybrid monetization, of course we need to look at the perspective that even the topics like acceptance towards the viewing ads in exchange for the free content is different in different markets. So one of the reasons why, for example, we see more ads in markets like India or Mexico versus like Sweden is, of course, that more people are eager to buy in those tier one markets, but on the other side, we see much higher acceptance for ads in those emerging markets. Yeah, so that's why of the reasons why actually those ads and hybrid monetization matter much more in those emerging markets. And we, even if we look even at the data, that was my kind of combined analysis done for the last year, when I try to estimate what is the ads and IP market revenue. So for example, like even if we look at some market like US, like the ads is for sure important part of the business, but actually if we look at the markets like India and Brazil, in many of those markets, the ads markets, it's actually as big as IIP market, sometimes even bigger. So that's why, again, if we look at the like market prioritization, especially for hybrid games, we shouldn't just look at the like revenue, like the market by revenue, like in like kind of this case, uh, but we should actually look at the data by downloads as well, because again, that sometimes is better proxy for ad monetization, of course. Okay, if we go further and we ask ourselves, okay, what is happening with this monetization as well? Of course, we see growing importance of the user acquisition as well. So we see it across all segments. So for example, this is actually my analysis done for top games on Android and iOS, comparing growth of paid installs year over year for like top games and like in all different segments, like top 10 games, top 1150, and so on. We saw that, of course, the especially top games are investing much more in user acquisition in the past, but actually across the board, we see more and more actually companies and games investing, at least trying to understand how it works, and doing that even in the small scale, but still making sure that they can acquire users and fight for the users. And of course, in this case, it's good to remember what is the reality of the metrics in different genres. So, for example, some genres, they have much higher concentration. Like in this case, we see the role playing in US as the example. So in this case, we have the aggregated Google spend divided by the different leagues of the companies. So like the first league is like the top companies, then the second league is like the smaller companies, then the third leagues are smaller companies. And we see that in this case, really big share of the whole user acquisition taken by the top companies. And we see that even the CPI and the bid they can bid for the user is much higher versus the kind of the baseline for the smallest. Versus if we have, for example, some genres like casual, we see that market concentration is much lower, which means that, for example, from the business perspective, entering with the user acquisition for a new game for those genres like role playing will be much harder than, for example, for those casual genres. Yeah, because again, that there's way more players across the markets, so the market's way more divided, and then the difference between bidding between top companies and middle-sized companies is actually much lower. But even in this casual genre, we see, of course, some genres that are extremely hard and competitive, like match 3, for example. Yeah, when actually majority of that market is just even in user acquisition taken by the few companies, they have extremely good monetization. They can bid much more heavily than other players. Okay, so what? With that comes the question. Okay, what we can do with that? Just to kind of summarize my presentation, again, the situation in the mobile market is improving. It had quite a lot of challenges in the recent months, but we see quite positive move in the last months. So I think steadily, I believe starting from end of the even actually last months in terms of investment are getting better. So I think starting from end of 2023, beginning of 2024, situation should be much better than now. US is still very important, but again, most of the growth will be coming from emerging markets. And again, I'm touching the topic quite often, making sure that I'm sharing the most recent data, because I think especially for those companies that have limited resources, that they don't want to just bid and fight in those battles that are the hardest. It sometimes makes more sense just to be more picky in terms of choosing the markets, finding those that are on one side still big enough, but on the other side they are growing in terms of the downloads and revenue. And let's remember that the quality bar is rising. Yes, I think mobile gaming is still a good place to be, and I feel lucky that I'm in that industry. But again, the one of the biggest advantages of that industry is the biggest advantage. I mean, the biggest advantage of that market is that it's very scalable, that is very global, which means that it brings global opportunities, but of course it brings global competition, which means that we need to be really prepared for that. And that would be all from my side. Happy to answer some questions. Here or later. Happy to connect on LinkedIn. That's my barcode. If someone would like to connect on LinkedIn, I think it's always good to be connected with the industry, talk with people. So always happy to get some with the data. And of course, even from Google side, we try to bring more and more knowledge to the market as well. So I'm not sure if you heard about this initiative. It's called Google Game Camp Lite. Those are like the monthly meetups that are happening in the hybrid mode. So mostly happening in Warsaw, but there are sometimes in other locations. But what is most important, they are available online as well. So there is a lot of free knowledge uh, from the industry, because we kind of cooperating with industry on that. So we are sharing quite a lot of advanced knowledge with the market, because again, this quality bar is high, which means that you need to be kind of well prepared for that global competition. And that would be all from my side. Again, if you feel for any questions, happy to answer those questions.
Yeah, Mariusz, thank you very much again for your presentation. Very informative. Let's check. Do we have any questions from our viewers? Mhm. So at the moment, I see only good words about your presentation. People are really satisfied, and I bet they will contact you. I think like later, not like right now. And unfortunately, we have like no questions from the audience. But I've got some question. Like definitely not a professional, just like average user. Like I play the games, and you said a lot of different interesting ideas about developing the video game, like promoting it, etc. But if I'll try to ask you, something like to look at from the opposite side. So usually, when it's like young team, for example, of people who want to try themselves in a global market, to go somewhere, like to be successful. What kind of maybe from your data side, marketing side, you could tell us what kind of typical problems they face, and like typical, let's say, like stupid problems, situations young professionals could avoid.
So I mean, it's very broad topic, yeah. But I would divide those. I would divide the topics into like in the three areas. The first one would be situation where that actually I hear quite often is that, okay, you have three guys who will saying, we will do the game like Clash of Clans but just better. And they kind of forget, okay, it's really game that was like developed for many years for really kind of professional. It's not like you just come and you create something based on that idea and better, yeah. So kind of uh, so being and I think that is, for example, one of the biggest red flags that you will have once you come with such idea, for example, to investor, yeah. Because again, either you want to create something new and you believe that will be working, uh, but it's kind of hard to expect that small team will create something similar to something existing and better, yeah. So I would say or at least we'll have a lot of challenges with that, yeah. So I think that is the first point. Then the second point, which I think is extremely valid, is that uh, I mean, this quality bar is quite high, which means that you need to be prepared for that. And the best preparation for that is just that making sure that you have time to prepare it, optimize, and so on. Yeah, which means that uh, I know that for the people who like love to create the games, who like to develop topics like financial stuff, uh, or runway, it's not the most sexy topic, but it's really important one, yeah. So making sure that okay, how much time you have before your bank account will get dry, yeah. So when you need to start to be profitable, yeah. So how actually what kind of data you need to prepare, for example, for investors, to show that you know what you are doing. So, for example, okay, even if you are a small team, it's better, for example, to such investor to show like progress, for example, over last month, what you did. And okay, that data is not perfect yet, but okay, see how much progress we did about 6 months. So like in the 12 months that idea will be really good, versus just coming and saying, okay, that's our like brightest idea and that's how we want to do it. Yeah. So that's, I would say, that's the topic number two. And then the topic number three, I think, is really kind of spending some time on thinking, what type of game do I want to create. Yeah, because uh, a lot of teams, either they just uh, create the copy of the game that exists, either they try to create the games about the topics they have no idea. For example, someone is trying to create the game like chess game, for example, versus, okay, it's not so easy mechanics like and like thinking behind that. Yeah, if you don't have like someone who really is really good at chess, for example. Yeah. So or you, for example, create the game for the type of the game where you need to have extremely high number of graphic designers for a long time. Yeah. And it will be huge part of your cost and you even do not think about it. Yeah. So I think like like this third areas, looking at the perspective of okay, what is growing, what I can be good at that, and what resources I have for. So those are, I would say, more like the three areas that
Yes.
I would look I would look at first. Like, so the
Yeah,
first one,
that
just again, this no just no hurrah and doing something that is not so easy as it seems. Then something like financial preparation, and the third one is just some good time spent of market analysis and what can be working for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariusz. That definitely makes sense. For some reasons, people, I think, still believe that mobile gaming is some kind of Klondike. Just go anywhere, dig anywhere, and you'll get a lot of money. You'll get rich. So it seems like it's like different time, and you definitely need to prepare yourself, like prepare your product, and to ready, to experience different situations, like in your future, in development future, and be ready to solve any problems. So, thank you very much again for your presentation. It
Thank you very
was
much.
very informative, very interesting. So, we got Mariusz from Google. Thank you very much, and
Thank you.
see. Bye bye.
Have a good day. Have a good day. Bye bye.